Shabbat Shalom. This past week, on Wednesday, I was given the honor of being present for the installation of the new Catholic Bishop of Harrisburg. I was part of a small delegation of interfaith representatives who were invited to process in with the large delegation of people and later be greeted by the new bishop. There were thousands of people there, or at least maybe a thousand. Full room. Within our delegation was a Lutheran bishop, a Baha'i leader, an Episcopal priest, an Eastern Orthodox Christian priest, and 2 rabbis. The ecumenical officer said it sounded like the beginnings of a joke. While it was very much an honor and an important act of reaching across lines of difference in our society, the sort that leads to increased peace in the world, I also have to admit that sometimes I was wondering what I was doing there. Not that I felt I shouldn't be there, but built into the situation were so many contradictions of the sort that very much make up the experience of our modern diverse world, and that make navigating this complex world at times so interesting. On the simplest of levels, I was there to honor the faith commitment and the spiritual experience of some of my friends. I very much count the ecumenical officer of the Harrisburg Catholic Diocese as a friend of mine. He was the one who invited me and the others there. And I've always been able to speak with him about these sorts of issues. It's important that we all learn to acknowledge fully who others are in our society. And yet, as the ceremony went on and got beyond the entry processional, the colorful pageantry, and the absolutely gorgeous music, I began to feel myself pulling more and more away from what was being done, and especially from what was being said. And that is, of course, because the center of their faith commitment is around the claim that a particular Jewish man of 2,000 years ago is God, Lord, and Savior. Of course, that claim is at the center of their spiritual world. They are Christian, and that is precisely where we part from them. And in that ceremony, of course, it is precisely what they were emphasizing. So precisely what they were emphasizing was precisely where we part from them. Interestingly, of course, the Protestants and the Orthodox priest with us, who do not have problems with that particular claim about that particular man, they still were experiencing their own sets of differences. Additionally, there are also the differences in social values that many of us experience, the differences between what many of us here would advocate for a just and compassionate world versus what the Catholic Church would advocate. Yet of that, it must be said that many Catholics would also advocate for things different from what their church would advocate. And many Jews, especially these days in Israel, would advocate for things different than I would advocate for. Though I hasten to add, many Israelis also very much stand in disagreement with the current Israeli government policies, as we have seen. Even this is extremely complex. The Catholic Church, when it comes to economic values, is often extremely progressive. And yet when it comes to other social values, that same church is often extremely conservative. All of this got me thinking about the nature of disagreement, argument, and dispute, and how we might work toward shalom, wholeness and harmony in the world at times when we so much disagree with each other. And wouldn't you know it, is it coincidence or not, this week's Parsha is very much about dispute. In this Parsha, it is Parshat Korach. So yes, I'm sitting in the middle of this service, which has everything imaginably Catholic about it, right down to their communion ceremony. And I'm thinking about the Torah portion, Korach. We read about the uprising of Korach and his band of followers. The Parsha begins as follows. Vayikach Korach, Korach took. Korach, the son of Itzhar, the son of Kohat, son of Levi, he took himself, along with Datan and Abiram, sons of Eliab, and On, son of Pelet, descendants of Reuven, to rise up against Moses, together with 250 Israelites, chieftains of the community, chosen in the assembly, men of repute. They combined against Moses and Aaron and said to them, "You have gone too far, for all the community are holy, all of them, and the Lord is in their midst. Why then do you raise yourselves above the Lord's congregation?" When Moses heard this, he fell on his face. Then he spoke to Korach and all his company, saying, "Come morning, the Lord will make known who is God's and who is holy, and will grant him access to God's self. God will grant access to the one God has chosen. Do this, you, Korach, and all your band, take fire pans, and tomorrow put fire in them, and lay incense on them before the Lord. Then the one whom the Lord chooses, he shall be the Holy One. You have gone too far, sons of Levi." There is this uprising against Moses and Aaron. Now, in Pirkei Avot, a section of the Mishnah, 1800 years ago, Pirkei Avot, sometimes translated as chapters of the Father, sayings of the sages. In Pirkei Avot, we read, Kol machloket shehi l'shem shamayim sofa lehitkayim. Every argument that is for the sake of heaven shall in the end be productive. But an argument that is not for the sake of heaven shall not be productive. Which argument is for the sake of heaven? An argument between Hillel and Shammai, the house of Hillel and the house of Shammai. We'll get back to that. And one that is not for the sake of heaven. What is an example of an argument that's not for the sake of heaven? The argument of Korach and his band of followers. The distinction: an argument that is for the sake of heaven will be productive. An argument that is not for the sake of heaven will not be productive. An argument, what is an argument for the sake of heaven? An argument for a higher purpose. An argument for greater truth or understanding or goodness versus an argument which is being done in order to prove who is better, smarter, or superior, or who should hold power. An argument that is for the sake of heaven would be when two people are arguing not against each other, but with each other in order to try together to come to a greater understanding of truth. An argument that's not for the sake of heaven is when two people are arguing with each other, but really they're trying to say who is smarter, who is better. At the core of the question is why we are engaged in the dispute, and therefore the tone with which we engage in the dispute. As many of you know, the concept of vikuach, argument, or machlochet, debate, dispute, is a positive value in Jewish tradition. Argument is how we gain clarity and get closer to truth. Two scholars will come together and say, no, what about an argument? But it can be misused. Korach, it seems, is not arguing about what he is talking about. He's not arguing about principle. It is a personal dispute he's bringing up, masked in terms of principle. Something like we see happening all too often in US politics today. But when the house of Hillel and the house of Shammai, these are two schools, ancient schools of rabbinic thought, when the house of Hillel and the house of Shammai were arguing with each other, they were attempting to gain better understanding of how Torah is instructing us to live. We see even more. We see this even more when we look at a section of Talmud which discusses the disputes between the house of Hillel and the house of Shammai. One of the more famous passages of the Talmud from Eruvin 13b. Amar Rabbi Abba, Amar Shmuel. Rabbi Abba said in the name of Shmuel, for 3 years, Beit Shammai, the house of Shammai, and Beit Hillel, the house of Hillel, disagreed. One said, the halakha, the law, is in accordance with our opinion. And the other said, the halakha is in accordance with our opinion. Ultimately, a divine voice emerged and proclaimed, Elu ve'elu divrei Elohim chaim heim. These and these both are the words of the living God. These and these both are the words of the living God. But we follow Hillel. And the Gemara asked, since both these and these are the words of the living God, why are Beit Hillel privileged to have the halakha established in accordance with their opinion? And the reason is that they were agreeable and forbearing, showing restraint when affronted. And when they taught halakha, they would teach both their own statements and the statements of Beit Shammai. Moreover, when they formulated their teachings and cited a dispute, they stated the statements of Beit Shammai first in deference to Beit Shammai. And after giving some examples of this, the Talmud continues and says, this is to teach you that anyone who humbles himself, the Holy One, Baruch Hu, raises him up. And anyone who raises himself up, the Holy One, Baruch Hu, humbles him. Anyone who seeks greatness, greatness flees from them. And anyone who flees from greatness, greatness pursues them. Anyone who attempts to force the moment and expends great effort to achieve an objective precisely when he desires to do so, the moment forces him to, and he is unsuccessful. And oppositely, anyone who is patient and yields to the moment stands by his side, and that person will ultimately be successful. There's, at the very least, there is an issue about the nature of truth here and how we approach truth, how we handle truth. I recall in a multi-faith dialogue, a Buddhist priest making this distinction. He said some religious traditions, and he meant Western traditions, emphasize first and foremost the question, what is true? Whereas other traditions, and here he meant Eastern traditions, emphasize first and foremost the question, what is good? Some traditions emphasize what is true, and some emphasize what is good. And he said the problem with emphasizing what is true is it draws people into fighting with each other about what is true, and that takes them away from what is good. His point, we can live with different truth claims. What we need to do is focus on doing and being good. Is this why the Talmud says of Hillel and Shammai, Elu ve'elu? Both of these are the words of the living God, when they are both pursuing arguments that are for the sake of the greater good. When they're both pursuing arguments for the sake of the greater good, perhaps the words of both are the words of the living God. when we're all pursuing arguments for the sake of the greater good, not in order to prove that we're better than others. Perhaps we can claim that each has an element of truth. Can we live this way? Does it make sense to put goodness before truth? And what does that mean? It could mean learning to argue for truth without demonizing those who have different opinions. But what if we truly detest their opinions? Can we do this? That is a question for us to carry forward. We're not going to answer it tonight. But I will conclude with the very next account given on this page of the Talmud, which is also very interesting. The very next account on this same page of the Talmud reads, the sages taught the following baraita. A baraita is an old teaching that is as old as the Mishnah. But it was not included in the Mishnah. The sages taught, for 2.5 years, the house of Shammai and the house of Hillel disagreed. One said, it would have been preferable had humankind not been created than to have been created. It would have been preferable if humankind had not been created. And the other said, it is preferable that humankind was created. It is preferable for humankind to have been created than not been created. Ultimately, they counted the opinions, and the conclusion was, it would have been preferable had humankind not been created. However, now that humankind has been created, we should examine our actions that we perform and seek to correct them. And some say we should scrutinize our planned actions and evaluate whether or not and in what manner those actions should be performed so that we will not transgress. Shabbat Shalom.